Episode 2, Homecoming. A nostalgic, dramatic, and atmospheric story about Andrew's first days at home in Soviet Ukraine, 1985. Part 1. The smell of home. Their home was small but full of quiet miracles. The air smelled like boiled milk, damp laundry, and bars of Soviet soap. A scent so ordinary, yet it wrapped the whole apartment in warmth. This was apartment number 3, on the ground floor of a tired 5-story Khrushchevka. The building stood like a stubborn giant, its concrete walls chipped and paint flaking under the weight of years. It had been built over land that once held water, so the basement beneath their feet was always damp, filled with rusted pipes, cracked tiles, and the heavy stench of sewage that sometimes crept up into the hallway. But to baby Andrew, newly returned from the hospital, none of that mattered. In his tiny, swaddled world, this was safety. Part 2. Mama Olga. Olga, his mother, was only 24. Her hands moved with a tenderness that was almost instinctive. She had soft brown hair tied in a messy bun and eyes that always looked just a little tired. She worked at the registration desk of the local clinic, where people queued in long lines for hours, with faded medical cards and hopeful eyes. Now, home on maternity leave, she spent her days changing diapers, boiling bottles, folding cloth diapers over the heater, and calming Lena, who was only 2 years older and now felt displaced by the tiny intruder in their lives. Sometimes, Olga would sit by the window with Andrew in her arms, staring out into the gray courtyard where pigeons picked at breadcrumbs and old neighbors traded gossip in worn slippers. Part 3. Papa Yuriy. Yuriy was quiet, a man of few words. He worked as an electrician on a nearby construction site, a place that always seemed unfinished, with rebar sticking out of frozen ground and wheelbarrows sinking into mud. He left early every morning, sometimes before the sun rose, with a metal lunchbox in one hand and a thermos wrapped in newspaper. His face was weathered beyond his 30 years, but his smile, when it came, was real. He didn't say, "I love you," often. He showed it by tightening screws in a broken crib, fixing the broken kitchen socket, or handing Olga a handful of fresh tangerines from the market when he could find them. When he got home, he always crouched down to Andrew's level, looked into the tiny eyes, and whispered, "Hey, Malyash." Part 4. Lena and the baby. Lena was 2 years old and already full of opinions. She didn't quite understand why she had to share Mama's lap, or why she wasn't the only one being sung to anymore. She threw small tantrums, dragged her favorite stuffed bear across the linoleum floor, and occasionally peeked into Andrew's crib to stick her tongue out. But then, when nobody was looking, she would whisper to him, "Don't cry, okay? I'm your big sister." And sometimes she would place a piece of candy under his blanket as an offering, before scampering off like a little shadow. Part 5. The town. Outside. Outside their apartment, the small town moved with slow Soviet rhythm. Buses wheezed down cracked asphalt roads, their engines sputtering in the cold. Radios on windowsills played old ballads or distant speeches. Teenagers kicked deflated footballs in the courtyard. Neighbors leaned on railings, gossiping between laundry lines. The stairwell smelled like boiled cabbage and wet wool. Paint peeled from the walls. Pipes knocked in protest from deep within the building. But in all of it, in the rust, in the slowness, in the everyday, there was an honesty. Life was hard, but it was shared. Part 6. Visits to the village. Every few weekends, Yuriy would borrow a rusty Moskvich, and they'd drive to the countryside where Andrew's grandparents lived. Both sets of grandparents lived in nearby villages. The roads there were unpaved and full of potholes, and the car always smelled like petrol and fried eggs. But when they arrived, the world felt softer. Grandma Nina would take Andrew into her arms with a practiced motion. "Such a little prince," she'd say, bouncing him gently, while Grandpa Mikhail smoked his pipe outside, watching the goats. The other grandparents, Clara and Petro, lived closer to the forest. Their home smelled of dill and varnished wood. Clara disapproved of how much Andrew was being carried. "Let him lie down," she'd mutter, "or he'll never learn to be strong." But both grandpas, in their own way, adored him. Part 7. Winter and Light. The days grew shorter. The wind howled louder between buildings. Snow arrived like a silent surprise, covering the gray with something pure. Inside apartment number 3, Olga hung diapers near the radiator, the steam fogging up the windows. Lena sat on the floor, drawing crooked suns and awkward houses. Yuriy changed a fuse in the hallway. And Andrew slept, smiled, cried, and lived his first winter in the soft glow of family, far from the noise of the outside world. He wouldn't remember these days. Not the hallway smells, not the snow, not his sister's candy under the blanket, but they would remember him, and the home that raised him, with peeling paint, squeaky pipes, and endless love, would always echo inside him.